Sounds wonderful.
It's not.
Nope, my house is brutally hot. Finally got the blind down because whoever built this house, that we have a that super tall window that we got like 20 or 12 feet up. There's a blind on it, but they didn't put a hook on the blind, so you can't pull it down. So I had to get a goddamn ladder, pull all the couches out, yank the thing down because whoever did the refresh of this house is
Do you
retarded.
ever consider getting an extendable stick?
It doesn't work because there's nothing to latch onto. That's what it's supposed to have, but whoever installed it did not install it with one of those things or they broke it off. But I see no marks on it. So it has nothing, no ability to pull it down. I have an
There's
extendable
probably
stick
a
for that
blind
purpose.
that wasn't meant for the
Yeah,
that
exactly.
height.
Whoever the prior owners refreshed this house, and I think they did it themselves, and I think they're really bad at it because they're also in collections, and we keep getting their fucking collection letters. I just throw them in the garbage. I've been telling them for months to come get them. Just ignore it. So it's like, okay, yeah, enjoy the repo.
Based.
I'm tired of trying to chase them down. It's like if you can't figure out to update your tax information with the government, then I do not know what to tell you. It's just, I don't know. You're an adult. You should have figured that one out a while ago.
Well, apparently people are doing the old classic walk away from your debt obligation with cars in the U.S.
Boo, not a good sign.
because mostly just on like apparent. What are those ones? Palisades.
Yeah.
I think it's Palisades, and there's one other one that I think it was Kia. I think it's Kia or Hyundai's version or Kia's version of whatever that is. Those were selling like $30,000 to $40,000 above MSRP during the pandemic,
Oh my god.
and now they're getting sold for MSRP or below. So people are like looking at their loan and realizing they owe $80,000 on a vehicle that you can buy the newer version of for like 55 or 60, and they're just
Brutal.
walking away from their car. Imagine owing 80 grand on a fucking Kia.
I know. 80 American.
Imagine
Oh my
you
god.
put $80,000 into something that's badged to Kia.
Just,
It's just mind blowing to me.
I wouldn't touch a fucking Beamer for that price. It's just not worth it. But a Kia is just something else.
I wouldn't touch a Kia for any amount of money, I don't think, but like
Yeah, pay me to
I'm
take it off the lot.
$80,000 for a fucking Kia.
That's pretty mental. All right, and we're live after that wonderful preamble. So today we're going to be doing a little bit more of a relaxed fit. It's going to be on the topic of central bank digital currencies because there's not a lot of research out there. It's much more speculation. This will just be just a fun discussion. So who wants to kick it
Speculation.
off? What?
Well, I was just gonna say speculation. That's our word for conspiracy. The government line is conspiracy.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We're misinformation peddlers.
It's a conspiracy episode because we're speculating about something that the government's doing. So,
Despite what they put on their website. Oh, no, can't put that on. Can't say that. That's conspiracy. We know it says it on Canada.ca.
I guess I can kind of kick it off, but from my understanding of like central bank digital currency, I think it's kind of intentionally confusing. Like the banks and the governments are using that terminology intentionally to make it confusing. Because what we already have a digital currency. Like if you, for all intents and purposes, if you've bought something online or you've paid your credit card bill online, like 99% of your transactions probably are done electronically in some way. And I don't know. I personally, thinking about it, I don't think I've ever written a check. And
I used to write checks to go to university because I went to boomer schools that didn't take credit card, or I don't know what your other options are.
there's the Interact.
Oh, yeah.
Electronic transfers. That's how I paid all my tuition, and that was like, those were thousands and thousands of dollar payments, and it was all done online. And this was like dating back to 2012. That
Yeah, and I did that in
I
2009. Like that's how it was done then too. Which
So
like
we are in
in tech
Canada,
world,
which
that's
is
pretty quick, or that's
more
like quite a
digital
long
than
time.
most.
yeah, Canada is ahead of the U.S. on a lot of the adoption for
Yeah,
that
we
stuff.
had
But
the
again,
chip, like the chipset in the debit and credit cards. Like they got that like years after Canada did.
yeah, and tap features and stuff like that, Canada was definitely ahead of the U.S. But all that is to say is like we do have a digital currency. So you ask yourself like, what's the difference between like our current system and what a central bank, quote unquote, digital currency is? And from my understanding of what's been proposed, is like the difference there is like the central bank would basically run the ledger for the currency. Right now, you have a bunch of like intra bank ledgers that are all settled out on like a complicated mainframe system that's run by the various financial institutions with like that have like I don't know how many in Canada. It's probably dozens of different groups that participate, and then in the U.S. it's got to be hundreds or thousands. And it's so it's like and like the big backbone ones would be like the credit card companies and stuff. And so like I guess there's like multiple ledgers, and by ledger I just mean I don't know how worth it is going into that, but it's basically just like the tracking system of who owes what and who has what balance. Essentially, it's like transactions and balances recorded on a thing that can keep track of all those numbers. And so now currently you have a lot of it is already digital, a lot of it already is electronic, and it's distributed between various groups that have their own ledgers, like the credit card companies and banks and interbank systems. And so the proposal would be to make a currency that all runs on a central bank ledger. So just be the central bank would be the one controlling the ledger. So we wouldn't have a bunch of interrelated, groups that run various different types of ledgers. You'd have one ledger run by the central bank. And I guess the selling point that the governments are trying to sell people on is the convenience factor, I guess would be the main one. And I think the way that you could sell it in terms of convenience would be it'd be much easier, like theoretically it'd be much easier to have like instantaneous payments that show up and are deducted in real time, and that are much more secure, I guess, in terms of say you go to pay. I think would be a common one. Like you go to buy something used secondhand, and you send someone currency on the central bank digital currency network. It would be very secure and instantaneous and finalized, so you could buy stuff. It'd work essentially with the same reliability almost as cash. Whereas now, like some people might use e-transfers, but e-transfers can be fraudulent and reversed, and they're different banks have
Every
different
time I
rules.
send an e-transfer, it tells me I can't reverse the e-transfer. How do you reverse an e-transfer?
You talk to the bank.
Oh, okay.
So there's definitely been a lot of scams where, like a common scam for buying used things is if you compromise someone's bank account details. One of the things you can do is buy something secondhand or used using an e-transfer, and then you get the item, and then the person that got scammed will complain to the bank, and the payment will get reversed because it's fraud. And then so the person that sold the secondhand item is out of the cash because they gave away the item to the scammer, and then the e-transfer, the money got reversed, and there's literally nothing that person can do. There's no recourse in that situation. So you basically just get scammed and lose your item.
This is one of the things that seems incredibly difficult to solve with central bank digital currency is that depending on what they implemented it on, the ability of other people to say, take your card and pretend to be you. It just seems like you're going to add a lot of barriers, a lot of friction if you put in those security free features. it'll lead to people not using it.
Well, I think
Well, if you force everybody to use it, then there you go.
well, you like for example, you could make it a bit. Again, like this is where it was why kind of we have to be in the realm of speculation. But you could see a system right where it's tied to your identity, right, and then you so if you're buying something used, you just have to match the ID card with the payer, right? If you know what I mean. So I don't know how exactly, but you might have you'd show them your central bank digital currency app or whatever, and it'd have your picture and your ID, and then you'd be like, oh, this, the ID matches with the person that's paying me, and then boom, you know what I mean? It'd be like a driver's license, but for payment.
For online, I could see that still being a problem. I could see that helping a lot in real life transactions, but then real life transactions are probably not where most of this fraud is occurring.
Some of it does occur in real life, and the other fraud scam that happens is just people buy stuff and then they basically beg and plead with their bank to reverse the transaction as fraud or something, right? And that again, like not all of these use cases would be perfectly solved by digital currency, but that'd be one. And the other one that I think is also probably the most convenient would be if several governments, like if you got a central bank digital currency that was in conjunction with other governments, then you could like instantaneously and cheaply send currency internationally would be the big one for a lot of
The
people.
other big one there with that is tracking, like the other big, I guess, benefit, according to central banks who are pushing this, is that you can then also track very closely transactions to stop like large scale criminal operations. So that's the other benefit there.
Small scale is probably the easy, like right now it'd be totally inefficient to try and track small scale stuff. I'd imagine they mostly go after big stuff now.
Yeah, but this is an additional tool in the toolbox, right? Like it would allow for an expansion of the toolbox is kind of the way that I saw somebody put it.
Well, I think that goes to the, I guess it would be, maybe some people would see that as a positive, but I think they're selling what I guess what I was getting at is they're selling convenience, right?
I just don't like, based on the survey I took for the Canadian central bank digital currency survey to see what people thought about it. They did not give me any faith that it would be any more convenient than a debit card. Like it sounded a lot like a debit card.
Well, that's basically what it would be, but then you would have like the central banking powers, some additional ones, right?
I think the one thing that I did see on the survey, I think, was international payments. And one other one, which I don't know how this would work, but that was on that survey, was offline payments.
I saw that, and that'd be an obvious advantage over debit cards, but I'm so lost on how they could implement that as with their tracking, because they basically put the tracking every transaction instantaneously as a non-negotiable. And how are you going to do that offline? I don't understand that aspect.
I guess one way you could implement that is you could have both devices essentially sign. So say you're paying, the system's offline and at a grocery store, but both devices are still,
powered up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You could have them sign a transaction that would confirm, and then once the system comes back online, both devices would transmit
so you have temporary offline usage.
Yeah, the temporary offline use would basically batch save the transaction on both devices and then confirm the transaction once the devices were back online. You could have it settle out such that once both devices send the confirmation or whatever, I don't know. Like you could figure out some way to like locally store the transaction and then send it to the ledger once things were reconnected, would be my assumption.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was thinking full offline, but yeah, they would absolutely advertise that as being offline. Be like, oh, you'll only be offline for a couple minutes in any situation, right?
Yeah, I don't. There have to be some sort of time limit, I assume. But yeah, that'd be my guess of how they're phrasing offline. which seems pretty marginal in terms of benefit, but
It would be a pretty big benefit though, because I know in my town there was a blackout for a day, and that pretty much shut down a bunch of stores because nobody shops with cash. And like my town's fairly rural, it's probably one of the higher percentages of cash, but there are a lot of stores that just figured it wasn't worth running.
Was
and
that the
shut down for
Rogers?
day. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put a pin in that because I have that, like, that really applies to like just the overall idea of like a central digital currency.
Yeah, like it's just at the point where so many people use digital that it would be advantageous even if you had a time limit of, you could do offline transactions for a few days or whatever, and then it would re-upload and verify all your transactions. So I could see that being useful over debit cards for sure.
yeah, I agree. Like, it would be a convenience. I mean, I think again they are selling convenience. It's just the the cost or the downsides is what they definitely are not willing to go too far into, which
Yeah.
I think I think I guess the question I really have is like how much how much more convenient it is than just having cash, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Like, so many of these problems are already like more or less, they're not perfectly solved and they're not like super conveniently solved by cash, but again, like for example, like the secondhand used item scamming stuff, like basically the recommendation on how to avoid getting scammed when selling stuff is cash.
Yeah.
Which is not that hard. Like, and people are like, oh, but what if, I don't want to carry cash, like what, it's like you can meet at a bank, or you can meet in a very public place. It's not, it's not that hard to coordinate things like that.
Yeah.
This, at least my opinion.
I'm surprised because I hadn't heard of this Interact e-transfer scamming before. And I know for a fact the majority of used gun purchases in Canada are done through Interact e-transfer. So
I think the Interact e-transfer scam is a bit overblown. Like a lot of people online like talk about it, but then you also see like people when it's brought up, people in the comments or whatever will be like, yeah, I've done like dozens and dozens of used sale transactions with e-transfer, and I've never had a problem.
yeah.
So I think it's one of those things that happens time to time, and it gets a lot of attention because like some single mom, loses out on $800 or whatever, right? And then, or has a sale, is selling something and gets scammed out of $800, and then it's like makes CBC and like careful, but I think end of the day it's not actually that common because it is a little bit complicated to get it pulled off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've used it, like, Interact tons of times for purchasing secondhand goods, and tons of my friends have, and I've never, within my circle, I've never heard of anybody getting nailed. So, like, to me, it definitely seems, I would agree, it seems overblown.
The hacker would need to access your bank account to use your Interact online. Is that what would be required?
Well, I have seen. So the one common way it happens is like an Interact account gets compromised, and then they use that Interact account to buy something online, like used, or like buy something online from someone, or Facebook Marketplace or whatever, and then they have the item that's worth money, and then the real account holder goes into their bank and like, oh, I got $600 yanked out of my account because my account was hacked. Please remedy this, and then the bank will reverse the e-transfer. So then the person selling the item is out of the sale price, and the scammer has the valuable item. So that's one way it's happened. I've also heard like reports of people just using their own bank account to buy stuff with e-transfer, and then getting the item and then somehow getting it reversed for fraud or whatever else. Like they go to their bank themselves and they say, "Oh, I didn't authorize this," or "This is a fraud purchase," or "This blah blah blah," and they just like basically bitch and complain and cajole the bank rep until the bank rep reverses it, and then same thing, the seller is out of the item sale price, and the scammer gets the item for free. So that's the two kind of like scenarios.
Would be more worried about the genuine Interact holder scamming the bank and you. I don't know. It seems like a lot worse things could happen when someone hacks your bank account than just them buying something used.
But I mean, it's mostly seller beware, right? It's like,
yeah,
these scams are like, if you're selling something online, that's buying is not really a problem. Like,
well, it's just like if this happened more frequently, people would stop accepting e-transfers.
Yeah, and some people don't. Like, you know, I do still see people that put cash online, like cash only on their used postings. But again, going back to like the central bank digital currency, I really think like this is a situation where cash is like gets you 99% of the way there in terms of solving.
Yeah, it really, like, I don't see
the
value in a digital one. Like, no, I don't see any additional convenience. I don't see, like, I especially don't see any additional security in a lot of ways. It's like, if you centralize a digital currency and the only ledger is at the Canadian, like, with the Canadian bank, it's not distributed across, like, the network of other banks. Like, if you have like a, you know, what would be like a digital
distributed.
Sorry?
Right? Like, who's to say it's not distributed? Just because you have one ledger doesn't mean you can't have it at every bank.
No, that's true. But like, it's still one controlling authority. You get one sort of weak point there versus like multiple different organizations. Like, it is certainly less distributed by nature.
The obvious advantage here, discussing the weaknesses of e-transfer, and the big advantage central bank digital currency would be buying at distance, because you can't send cash in an envelope and trust that it'll get there, or at least I would never do that. So you pretty much you would solve this e-transfer problem. Say you wanted to buy a gun from somebody in Toronto and you're in Vancouver, because you know that's common gun territory. Then you could do this central bank digital currency as a safer way than an e-transfer, where cash isn't really an option.
It's true.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, right? Is like you'd have something that's slightly more convenient, potentially more like
slightly safer than e-transfer, for sure.
Yeah, like it's slightly more like scam resistant than something like e-transfer. And I guess for me, like the only thing that I like, the convenience factor that I really latch onto that has been talked about is like the international money, sending money internationally and paying things for, if you had like linked central bank digital currencies with linked ledgers, like say Canada, US, Europe, whatever allied nations like that, kind of agreed to link all their networks such that it all worked seamlessly and with like a very low to zero cost like exchange essentially, then it could be very convenient. You're traveling somewhere and you don't have to even get a local currency or anything. You just go and
while it is always difficult to see international cooperation on anything, I think something like that would reduce the friction of traveling appreciably, and everyone wants tourism. So like I could see that definitely being a joint project that actually happens.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think it would be probably global, right? But it would be. I think you could definitely see a situation where Canada and like at least the U.S., right? Like they linked up a system, right? Because
Japan's in on it because they want as many tourists as they can get.
Yeah. So and even just sending payments like internationally, I think whatever. Like you're trying to buy something from, I guess, another example is a Canadian. Like there's occasions where stuff is a lot cheaper in the U.S. and you want to buy something in the U.S., but the exchange, you get dinged by the bank, 2 or 3% if you buy on a Canadian credit card, and the exchange is not very, it's just it just creates friction and annoyance dealing with that, and that would take it out. And or even investments too, right? Like you try to invest in USD denominated investments, and then you have to find a way. You have to use an exchange to convert your currency, and then you have to have a USD based bank account, etc. So if you could get rid of that friction, that actually would be a reasonable amount of pain circumvented. But I guess it is a step further than just a national central bank digital currency at that point. But you
kind of need both nations to have the central bank digital currency before you can have those negotiations.
Yeah, exactly. But so it's kind of a little bit contingent. But I definitely think that is part of the vision for these, right? Especially with the American one, right? Like that seems to be a big part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Should we discuss some of the negatives now?
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, my pet peeve, I told him this on the write in your own opinions section on the Canadian survey, is I can't see them replacing cash unless they're willing to set a limit at which they don't track transactions. Because if you're going to make every $5, $10, $20 transaction tracked and therefore, taxable, and, that's a big reason people use cash, realistically. It's like, oh, this contractor just fixed my leaky faucet. Here's $20 cash. And then the contractor doesn't report it. I mean, for the government, I guess that is a bonus that they now have a ledger of all these transactions that have occurred. And it's like, oh, you've never paid this person before, and they aren't related to you. And they're a contractor. I wonder if they're getting paid for doing some contracting work. But, I mean, it depends if they want complete adoption or if they want it to kind of supersede debit cards. Because if they don't make anything, if they make it entirely tracked, cash will never be fully obsolete. Would be my opinion.
Well, that's where I think, I think conceptually the main downside is just it hands more power to the government, right? Like if it's the government if the government has the ledger, then they have the ability to monitor those transactions, and they also have the ability to, I guess we'll get into that later, but like the ability to control the actual currency, certain aspects of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Especially exactly. Like depending on what type of digital, because like the difference between I think it's good to make a distinction between like electronic currency, which is what we have now, and a digital currency, because digital currencies, which is what they're proposing, are things like Ethereum, where you can actually program in various functionalities to the currency itself, whereas like an electronic one is you just move $1 here or move it there. That's it. There's nothing else you can do with it. But a digital one, you can actually change it so it's like, okay, you were purchasing from a particular vendor, because it's on code, it's actually got code, like it can be coded. If it's saying like, no, you are now restricted because you have, let's just say, for example, like here's actually a decent example. It's like, okay, you want to purchase a gun from a gun vendor. It's like, well, that gun vendor, like you go to swipe your ID, but you've actually been barred because you have a felony, or not in Canada, like a criminal record. You're not allowed to purchase firearms. The thing will recognize that you are trying to buy a firearm and stop the transaction. Like you can actually program that into like a digital currency. Like, so I think it's important to.
I mean, I don't know if that's the best example, since that already is how firearms purchases work, but with a PAL, where they key in your PAL and it tells you whether or not they're allowed to buy the gun or ammo. But I think the dystopian, way too far slippery slope example would be a gas station purchase.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you've already bought your 40 liters of gas for the month. You're not allowed another drop.
Well, and what's really funny, like people might say like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like they wouldn't do that. Well, I believe I can't remember who he is, but he's one of the high ups within the government in the UK in the finance area, and that's exactly what he stated. He's like, we need a digital currency to then we can program it to stop people from purchasing certain things that like aren't like, socially beneficial is basically what he was saying. Not like, oh, you are like a criminal, you are no longer allowed to purchase a gun because that's a no, that's the law. It's not like that. Like his entire point was we want to be able to control the way people purchase things to get behaviors that we want, that we think are good. Like it's paraphrasing, but that was exactly his statement. Like that was the exact thrust of his statement. Like we are going to have the digital currency will allow us to make sure that we can work with businesses to ensure that people are making purchases that are appropriate and like socially appropriate. So if people want to argue against like, oh, that dystopian, like you can't buy any more gasoline, it's like, no, that like you have a high up government official within the UK already making that assertion that that's what they want to do. That's the point of it.
I wonder if they could put marginal tax rates onto individual purchases.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure they
first
could.
40 liters of gas are taxed at the regular rate, but then your next 40 liters are 5% higher tax rate or whatever, something like that.
It'd be very like depending on how it's implemented, obviously, but if they like depending on it all would come down to like the utility of the currency, but that would be easily doable if it was like fully programmable, right? Because you could assign every transaction like a type, right? So that's a gasoline. Yeah. And you'd have depending on how fine-tuned the category, because that already happens, right? For credit card transactions, credit card transactions are grouped into by vendor, right? What type they are, like it's a grocery store. So you could see a much more fine-tuned version of that with digital currency, and then you could just say, you could have a very simple, algorithm or program that says if it's over this dollar value, there's an additional tax at this amount, and if it's under this, blah blah blah. So that'd be very doable. Which, I don't know.
Because if you're talking behavior modification, I mean that's really the ticket, rather than an outright, after a certain point you're cut off.
Yeah, it's like marginal rate, so that your first another classic case would be like alcohol, right? Like, we don't mind if people drink a couple drinks a week, but as soon as they exceed that amount of spending, then the tax goes up to 100% of the purchase price, then it goes up to 200, and then it goes up to 300, and to dissuade
Man, I can already see the market for the bootleggers popping up. Like, I only use my alcohol limit to buy for other people and sell it to them.
Yeah, you're teetotaler, so you resell your booze and your weed and your gasoline. There'll be people that literally just like, that's their how do you make your money? I'm a vice reseller.
But because it's digital currency, how do you sell it back to somebody?
Personal transaction. You did some work in their house.
Yeah, there's this huge booming industry of handymen.
Yeah, they're actually
of dick suckers.
Yeah, even better. Legalize or decriminalize prostitution. You have to allow them to pay for the prostitutes.
Exactly. That's coming down the pike for legalization, right? So there you go.
But I mean, there would be an enormous industry of handymen that would be recognized for the first time if they actually had all of their transactions tracked.
Yeah,
handymen are probably your number one group of people that refuse to deal in anything but cash.
Oh, and servers, waitresses and stuff.
Oh yeah, it'd be over.
Yeah, just kills the entire fucking hospitality industry.
To be honest,
dead overnight.
I'm gonna be honest. Like, I'm not a fan. Like, I'll put my bias on the table. I'm not a fan of central bank digital currencies, but if it destroyed that industry, then it's actually pretty hard. Like that might be worth it. Might be willing to bite the bullet of government overtake if overtaking everything if it means server industry gets fucking annihilated. Just, drives me nuts.
Then the obvious one that Canada's the prime example of is complete freezing out of, say, assisting protesters that don't align with the government's ideology.
Well, that would never happen in a democracy.
Yeah. When Canada did it, it only blocked all digital exchanges and shut down some people's debit cards from being able to withdraw cash from their bank accounts. But if it was digital currency, it could be much further reaching.
Yeah, that's definitely the huge downside. Huge and obvious downside is government just controlling everything, and
like Canada especially because they've demonstrated that they have not only the ability but the will to actually freeze citizens' assets.
Yeah, despite not getting warrants, which you technically need to. So
no, when there's a state of emergency. Guys. Yeah, don't technically need to do jack shit in state of emergency. But it's not martial law. It's just it's the equivalent. It's just not it.
It's emergency.
Yeah,
we've had a lot of those recently for sure. There's the emergency of people being parked downtown. The emergency of people getting flus.
You hate to see it.
That was like, actually, I haven't checked. Are we still in the COVID emergency technically?
Well, we just do whatever America does. So
I know the WHO lifted it like a month or two back, and America was early May because they lifted the emergency, which is why unvaccinated non-Americans were allowed back in the country.
So funny
in May.
Like, it's crazy. Some of the few people that are more left-leaning that I talk to, and there was a joke in the room about, oh, COVID's over. And they're like, no, only the state of emergency's over, actually. Is it COVID's still going around? And I was like, wait, there was a state of emergency that recently ended? What? It's like, it's wet.
Yeah, there was I think in Canada, a lot of that is provincial. But
yeah, our healthcare systems are very provincial, so that would make sense.
But yeah, it's crazy. Like, I mean, yeah, America just wrapped that up. But again, like that, coming back to the digital currencies is I think
they're not going to let you buy ivermectin. Simple as.
Yeah.
They already don't let you, and now they're going to double not let you. You're not going to be allowed to buy for your pets. But yeah, that's just. It's definitely kind of scary that it coincides with a, I guess it doesn't help that we've had a recent stint of totalitarian leaning, policy and government overreach in a lot of Western countries. It doesn't help my view of central bank digital currency.
Yeah, it seems a little sus. Let's just call it that.
We just came out of a period of some pretty big overreaches and power grabs, and there wasn't. I guess the other thing that's the big part of that's also really depressing is like how little like pushback happened. So because I think if you give, for example, like if you give the government, say the central bank digital currency comes into Canada and they say, well, it's going to work the same way as the current monetary system where, like you have to get a court order, blah, blah, blah. And this is, it's status quo. Everything's going to be the same. Like there's not going to be any more government intervention or government reach into the central bank digital currency than the current monetary system. It's all fine, guys. Like, the enforcement mechanism of like ensuring that doesn't happen is basically people bitching about it, if you know what I mean. Like if they start to do that, then people going, hey, that's a bunch of bullshit, didn't you promise that you wouldn't do that and we're gonna vote you out? That would be like the way that you keep people from doing it. And the big problem there is like that just didn't happen with like COVID. The COVID restrictions and stuff is like a lot of that stuff was like violated, certain I guess in America the Constitution, in Canada Bill of Rights and stuff. Like, there's big violations, and then people just didn't care, seemingly, or didn't care very much, and were just like, go along to get along, and didn't push back. So it's like, if that's going to be people's response to these things, then I don't really want to don't want to let the cat out of the bag and let that be an option, because clearly we don't have the societal pushback to like make sure it's not abused. Like,
yeah, exactly. And it's like, and you have to think, it's like, once those tools are in place, even if you think that the current parties in power are going to do the right thing with it, like, eventually they're not going to be in power. And who's to say that the next group...
You say that, but Trudeau's, son and grandson will be ruling Canada.
Yeah, we're gonna remain a constitutional monarchy. We're just gonna switch to the monarchs.
We're gonna have the Trudeau dynasty.
Yeah, you never know.
That's a good point, though. Like, the strongest argument against giving the government this kind of power to, say, a left-wing American would be to say, would you want Trump to have this kind of power?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's actually what I was going to say. It's like just think, like, you give Trump the power of a digital currency to then start restricting things and, programming it the way that he sees fit. Like, do you
only
not...
hotels that work?
The Trump hotel.
You have to go to Trump Tower.
Trump restaurant, booming.
I mean, his grift with the digital currency.
Oh my God, it would be
legendary.
Incredible.
No tax on any Trump institutions.
400% tax on everything else.
Yeah, yeah. That'd be like a good fucking satire show. Would just be like Trump with a digital currency and control over it as his second term. Oh my God, that'd just be legendary.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's like just a good point to anything. Like, if you are building any such like political or economic or whatever tool that you're going to then put into play, you have to design it in such a way that, like, design it and then hand it and then do it like this thought process, like, or thought experiment. Give it to your enemies, your political enemies, and see what they can do with it. And if they can do a ton of harm with it, or even a bit of harm, then you've designed a pretty bad tool, because eventually you're not going to be in power, and then it's going to be used against you.
Well, yeah, that's French Revolution 101. Like, yeah, you don't last in power forever. Better be careful what you stir up.
Yeah, exactly. You start slicing off heads, and it's like, uh-oh.
Pull out the guillotine.
And then all the people... Well, it was like, that's exactly what happened under, like Mao's China and the Russian revolutions. Like, a ton of the a ton of the big players who were the biggest diehards in the beginning wound up getting put up against the wall.
Well, I just also think seems like just a bad time to be giving government power simply because people are just pushovers. I don't know if people will decide to like not.
Yeah, the one thing I do think is a little bit different, though, at least in this time, it's like, at least with COVID, everybody was super scared, and then they started grabbing the power, so, like, we're no longer in that period, but...
Yeah, I agree, but I think there's too many things that you can fearmonger with, right? Like, before COVID, it was terrorism, and...
Yeah, exactly, that's true. It's like you can just whip up another...
I don't know.
Russia now.
Well, I think global warming is making it come back again.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what CNN was. That guy got caught on, like, in like a bait journalist. He was like one of the executives or something like that, high up, and he was saying, like, yeah, now that COVID's kind of dying down, we're going to use global warming as the next big thing to, whip everybody into a stupor over.
Or it's going to be, you need to accept central bank digital currency, otherwise the AI overlords will kill you all.
Yeah.
So another nice fear-mongering topic to get used, and I don't know. There's like
going to end the world.
Infinite number of them, right? Like it's not that hard to whip up the next big scare. Like, people are, Yeah, people are very conscious of
People are
dangers and threats.
looking for threats. And,
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's human psychology is to be very, very hyper vigilant around threats, right? And you don't need much to like spin something into a scary story. I mean,
Yeah, that's very
Jesus, like
true.
back the '80s, satanic panic, like somehow
the good old
kindergarten
days.
teachers or whatever got turned into the big bad boogeyman. Like it, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's like there's always a panic right around the corner, right? So
Yeah, if they can turn that into like a almost decades long scare story, like the news can turn anything into it. So I don't know. I agree that it's nice that we're out of the. Seems like most people are kind of over the COVID fear hump or whatever. Like, there's a few holdouts that are still locked
masking
in the basement,
up outside. I saw one of them the other day. I was like, what's going on here, man? It's not smoky anymore either.
Or was it for
So
allergies?
Can you
Give them
mask
the
for
benefit of
allergies?
the doubt. It depends on what you're allergic to.
that's
One of the
true.
reasons
Could be that.
You see masks in Japan before COVID, there was like smog, allergies, and people that don't like the look of their chin.
I actually think that is the case. Like some people are now using masks. I saw a post on that just to digress a bit, but I saw people posting on Reddit like, yeah, I'm probably gonna keep wearing a mask because then it hides like my face, and I really don't like my nose or I really don't like my chin. And then a whole bunch of people in the comments saying like, yeah, like that's why I'm gonna keep wearing them. Like this is great. It's like Jesus Christ. Ugh.
The fugly
Cheap.
campaign.
Cheaper than plastic surgery.
Yeah,
I think-
cheaper, temporary.
One thing kind of ties in back into the like marginal tax discussion, but having that central ledger with all of the data on all of the transactions would, I think, lead to a resurgence and further attempts to try and do a centralized sort of command economy, because now you can see what everyone's doing with their money. And I mean, that would obviously be a bad idea because humans are not capable of making an economy function the way they want it to.
Yeah, it's too complicated.
So
You have
many
to.
shiny new levers to play with to the federal government, and they're like, "Oh, we could write this.
We could figure this out now. Like we got it down. It's like, you fucked up inflation pretty hard. So I don't know if your track record's improved at all. One of the other things that I actually thought was really interesting is a part of the central digital currency push for it is because the governments are so indebted that they don't have a good way out of the debt that at least they don't believe they do without being in a politically expedient manner is all they're looking for. They don't want to cut costs anywhere because they don't want to upset voters. And so one of the ideas with central digital currency is then you can start to put in more rules around where people can invest their money, and that way they can then push big pension plans and stuff like that, push the private sector into investing into their bonds, because they have all of these bonds that they're going to need to.
I think that's a bit conflating that. That's like two separate issues to a degree, I think.
Yeah, it is, but it would make that easier, right? Like if you're bringing in more.
I'm confused because there's so much regulation on buying and selling and investing in general. Like, I don't understand what the central bank digital currency would have to do with those regulations. Because all it would be regulations that apply regardless of whether or not there's a central bank digital currency, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Yeah, I think I don't know how. Like, I think that's gonna. I think what Colin was saying is gonna be put on the table of like governments forcing certain entities, especially pension funds and the like, to invest in government bonds. I think that might come up, but I don't know if central bank digital currencies would play into it that much. I guess the one angle I could see is like you could program digital currency. You can program it to expire. You can program it to do certain things. You could kind of use those mechanisms to push people's spending and savings into their into their own pension savings or whatever. So you could use it to incentivize people to put money into those accounts.
Yeah,
indirectly.
that's kind of what I think. Where it's like, okay, these like you're no longer at a bank, you're now with the central banks, like
Oh,
like your
that's another
cash.
discussion though, is whether the central bank digital currency would replace banks. Like that's like the full end 110% on the central bank digital currency train is replacing banks. But I think in any reasonable state, the banks will remain as they are now.
Well, I guess what I was like, so I think you may be missing what Con was saying. So like the government could bring in a provision that says pension plans have to invest half their investments in government bonds. They have no choice. They're forced to have 50% of their allocation in government bonds. And then, but again,
Yeah, and you can do that without a digital currency, but in some of the discussions that I was seeing, that's a part of the discussions with digital currency. Like they're packaging that up. So, but yes, you absolutely could like separate those two entirely and just put in the legislation and say like, no, you like if you are a pension fund, like Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, you have like because you're fall under the public sector employees. Though you are managing for like private people, you have to put it in that. But from what I saw, there's like they're trying to pair it with the same thing to force people into that, like because then they get both sets of controls, right?
Yeah, like I could see them packaging it in like one like financial reform package,
Yeah.
but like you said, they are reasonably distinct in terms of you don't need one with the other. Like they are mutually exclusive, or they're not mutually dependent on each other.
No,
in any way.
exactly.
But I do think a central bank digital currency, like having the controls, could make it easier for them to funnel money into parts of the economy and parts of the banking sector or whatever that were more controllable and were more amenable to investing in government funds, right? Like they could essentially indirectly influence that by providing like with the marginal tax rates, they could program certain tax rates and stuff such that people were incentivized to put their money in, say, a pension fund that invests with the government rather than any other one. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but like it definitely could happen, and it would help them with that, right? It would help them kind of play off each other in terms of that.
Well, I guess the other thing is that you could streamline some of those investing controls if they could be built into the central bank digital currency, so that you didn't have to have so many just like outright controls on investing accounts. Could be within the currency itself rather than outside it.
Yeah, and you could even have like the enforcement essentially built into the currency rather than having to have.
Yeah, and like from my understanding, that was like a part of it, right? Like where it's you cannot get away from it, right? Like it's just automatically built in.
Again, like that, it's hard to say because there's so much uncertainty about how a digital currency will actually look. I think,
given the incompetence of the government, it's like I bet you on launch it'll be the most broken thing of all time.
I think the slippery slope, not fallacy, the slippery slope argument, like a genuine one, would kind of be in play here, because I do have a feeling that governments will introduce a central bank digital currency, but they will, when they first introduce it, it'll be very
mild
in terms of it. Yeah, like it'll be a very
non-required. There'll still be like you can still get bills like cash bills and coins. You can still use a debit card. It'll be completely optional.
Yeah, I think that's how it'll. I think that's their plan, right? Is if I was to speculate, I think they will bring it in, but they'll bring it in a very mild form, and then once everyone's kind of, you leave it for a few years, and then once 99.9% of the population is using that versus cash, like cash usage will shrink and shrink even more. Like in Canada, it's already, I think, quite low, and if there's an alternative, and they incentivize the alternative, then it'll just keep shrinking, and then eventually they'll be like, oh well, hey guys, like only 1% of transactions are cash. Let's just get rid of it, and then boom, it's over with, right? Like they don't need to introduce the strong version. It will be very easy to slowly ratchet up the weak version to the strong version over the course of a decade or two.
Yeah, exactly. And then like at the point where people start to realize like there's a problem, it's too late, right? And you just say, well, this is law now. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. Like, too bad. And it doesn't matter which party you have in power unless you have like a truly libertarian party. Like, they're very much going to enjoy that level of control, whether it be NDP or conservative or liberal or like Greens. It doesn't, or Bloc Québécois, like, or in the States, Democrat or Republican or anywhere else. Like, none of those people, none of those politicians are going to look at that level of power and say, let's reduce this. Like, this is a bit too far. Let's dial this back. It's like, of course not. Like, once people get power, they very much do not want to relinquish it. Even if, like, you have to be a very, I would say, morally and grounded, strong individual to look at that, like to be in that position and actually start to roll things back. Like, I just do not see the vast majority of people ever looking at that, like having that power and making the right choice there.
I think we just have ample evidence that the type of people that go into politics in, whatever various democracies, generally, yeah, they just aren't those type of people. Like that, there's the odd exception, but like the majority of people that are incentivized to enter into politics are usually the types that are quite motivated by power. And
Yeah,
unless
like
our political system fundamentally shifts, I don't think that will change. And you can anticipate that the type of person in 10 years or 20 years that will be at the helm of the country will be very similar to the type of person that's currently at the helm, and those type of people are, not the best stewards of power, and they definitely have not,
like
selfless or whatever.
I can't think of I can think of only a couple politicians where I genuinely believe that they would be like do the right thing in a situation where handed that power. Like, there's only a tiny handful, and that comes across multiple countries. The vast majority of them, like, it's like, no, they would probably look to expand it.
A lot of those people that you think, like, at least a lot of the ones that I think of that I think that are kind of responsible or would be good stewards of power, they generally don't last very long in politics. They generally get disgusted with it and leave because
or just get like ripped down by the others. Tulsi Gabbard's a really good example of that. Like, like her career was basically torpedoed by all of the people around her that knew she wasn't going to play ball and did everything they could to ensure that she couldn't stick around, right? Like, you had Hillary Clinton call her a Russian asset, which, like, that should have been a conviction on, like, slander. Like, truly, like, and she's one of the few people that I actually would think of, like, being one of those people that would be able to do the right thing. And yeah, look what happened to her.
Yeah, I think the U.S. has a lot of examples of, the politicians that are honest and have good motivations. They either are eventually ground down and start just towing the party line.
Yeah, start playing ball, right?
Or they just leave politics because they just can't handle there's not very many that actually maintain their kind of independence and integrity and last.
Yeah, I can think like Sanders is probably one of the only ones that's lasted like any length of time.
And even him, like
he plays ball.
The last few years he's definitely started to play ball a lot more with the kind of Democrat establishment, which I mean, can't really criticize him too hard. How freaking old is he? Like, it takes
or something.
Yeah, it takes a ton of energy to constantly be, in a state of basically conflict with your own party. So can't act too surprised that he kind of wore down over the literal decades that he maintained his integrity. But yeah, it eventually happens to pretty much everyone.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I think with central, like I mentioned this before, but I really think that it does open it up to like more attacks. Like if the only group that's controlling the ledger at the end of the day is the government, like I feel like that could wind up like just being just a better, like it just seems like a pretty good vector of attack. If you really want to fuck up a country, you knock that out and their whole transaction system goes down. Like we discussed earlier, when Rogers went out, that's one internet provider and cell phone provider in Canada, and that caused enormous amount of disruption. And like I can't, like it has to be billions of dollars in disruption. And like imagine having only one group control the ledger. It's like if that goes down, you are just toast.
I'd imagine they would set it up like I don't know what the correct words are, but where you just have multiple banks with this copies of the ledger that can also verify it, and then you could make it such that they would have to hack the banks and the Canadian government in order to like falsify the ledger, right? Because you have the ledger verify with itself between a few different trusted nodes.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's.
You could make an argument that either one is more vulnerable, because you could say like. Say the Rogers example. You could say, well, if any one group has such, is so important that they basically collapse the financial system when they go down, or like they shut it down, and there's 5 different groups, well then you kind of have to make sure that all 5 are doing their due diligence. And some of these are private corporations that don't necessarily, they're profit motivated, so they might be willing to cut costs where they shouldn't, and et cetera, versus like the government, that's one group that's needs to keep their shit together and verify it, and they're not profit motivated, so they can do everything they need to do to keep it safe. Therefore, they like, I could see an argument on either side of the equation. That
and then you realize that there's a bunch of we already have a big spy problem here. It's like,
Yeah, but you can make the argument.
The problem with the spies is mostly, well, maybe not mostly, but it's definitely in our private corporations.
Yeah, that's true as well.
That's cutting edge. Like, they killed Nortel. Like, in case people haven't heard the story, the summation is that Nortel got hacked by the Chinese government in the late 90s, cutting-edge Canadian technology company. And CSIS, the Canadian Intelligence Agency, told them they got hacked. Their response was to tell all their employees to change their passwords, which obviously didn't help. And eventually, the Chinese stole their intellectual property, made it cheaper, outcompeted them. They went bankrupt. And then the Chinese poached all of their best engineers because they had all the data on who was doing what. And Huawei's 5G network is based off of Nortel engineers working on their Nortel projects that ended up being 5G. But they're now all owned by Huawei, which is Chinese state-owned. Unless you ask Huawei.
Yeah, you shouldn't ask Huawei.
They've got a ledger with all their owners, and it's just the name of every one of their employees. And trust me, they own the company.
Yeah, it's a government, or it's a workers' co-op for sure, definitely.
Yeah. No
Definitely,
government influence.
if they wanted to defy Xi, they'd be free to. Definitely, nothing bad would happen. They'd be absolutely a-okay, and definitely wouldn't get Jack Mod.
Yeah. But like Canada still has some cutting edge industries, but they're probably all actively being compromised or attempted to be compromised by the Chinese.
Yeah, I think that's just what I was. Yeah, I could see both arguments having merit. Like, it just depends on the specifics, I guess. Like, because you can also think about like the military. Like, the military does certain networks or whatever. I'm sure they do get compromised, but like, do they get compromised easier than private sector? I don't know. Probably not. It's
The
hard
other
to say
one
for
is
sure.
like in the event of, say, a power outage or like not attacking the network because say it's too secure or they aren't smart enough to do it, but they attack the ledgers like electronically and blow up the networks. So, like Rogers had the problem where it just couldn't service all these things. If they did make it functionally offline and like each phone could keep a ledger for an X number of days, like that would give them way more room to work with than the Rogers example.
Yeah, I don't. I'm sure. I'm sure they like. I feel like in the ideal world, the government version could be more secure, but again, yeah, it's the government, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you definitely could make the government one more secure. It's whether or not they will, and
Yeah.
like might actively choose the worst possible option because of some ridiculous bureaucratic notion.
They're like, oh, guys, who did the Phoenix Pay system? Can you get them on the phone?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. It's like, last time they
We should
developed a big
contract this
system.
out. Like, I remember seeing the Phoenix Pay system in the news a lot. We should get those guys back in. Like, they did a bang up job. Yeah, I don't know.
Smartphones so powerful that they can just be nodes on the central bank digital currency website, and we can have 40 million nodes verifying everything.
I feel like that's not possible, but I don't know enough about it to dispute it.
Yeah, I also don't know enough about it to make to reasonably make the conjecture. I'm just throwing words around.
It's like, yeah, your iPhone 16 or whatever has the Canadian financial system in it.
Yeah, there's only like 40 million people. How much data can there be?
Exactly.
When 20 of them have adopted it, you'll still be able to hold those 20 people's data on your phone.
Yeah, it'll be like the metaverse.
Yeah.
Just be a ghost town. Build it and they will come, right? Right?
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
Right. What? Zuckerberg, right?
Hey man, just
Everyone's
give another 2
1
years.
100th of the data.
Distribute it, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
China imports 40 million phones into Canada, hacks our network from the inside.
Yeah. All of a sudden, like, Huawei comes back and forth selling $99 phones that are better than the iPhone. Oh, this is a weird coincidence. Yeah, odd. All of a sudden, they've incentivized to come back to our market. That's weird.
They're crazy.
I don't know. I guess moral of the story for me is just like, no thanks, not now.
Yeah,
That's how I feel.
I don't see any benefit. The e-transfer thing is the only thing I didn't know that kind of makes me think there might be a bit of an advantage to me in if I'm buying something online used. But it doesn't seem like nearly enough of an advantage that I would actually adopt it.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. It's like, I'm fine with the way I think our current financial system is relatively convenient. I mean, it's not perfect, but like compared to like whatever 40 years ago when people were fucking writing checks and having to do
signing your name after paying with your Visa.
Yeah, like there's a lot. Things could be a lot less convenient and it'd still work, which is evidenced by like the 80s or 90s when people were signing shit at the fucking supermarket. So I think we can get away with the current financial system and
we just
like,
need Twitter to become the everything app, and then we can use that for payments.
Another
just trade
thing
tokens.
Is that if this is such a great, convenient idea, a bank could implement it, right? Or they could give you that option of offline payments on a ledger that will update when you get onto the internet again. because it's so convenient. People will switch to the bank to use it. But I don't think it's that great of an idea. I don't think private corporations would go for it.
Well,
Or hear me out. If it was such a great idea, people could invent a digital currency on their own that's not run by the government, and then you could use that. Has anyone
That'll
thought
never
about?
happen. That's
Has
crazy.
anyone thought about that? A non-government digital currency.
But then
think-
how would you stop the terrorists from getting funding?
I think I have $1 million idea. I think I do. So.
Well, personally,
Yeah.
I think that should that'd be a $3 trillion idea because it'll hit the market capitalization of gold if you go through with it.
That's like a what, 3 trillion? That's like 1/3 of a Uganda gold deposit. So not even a big deal.
or let's just go back to gold coins.
Those
This-
work offline.
Yeah, that, but unironic.
Yeah, exactly. We got all that
I just saw an
Uganda
ad
gold
for
coming.
gold on TV the other day. I don't know what's going on.
What's
I think it
that?
was fake gold though. I think it was like one of those sites where you buy a token, like a digital currency, but that allegedly they have a vault full of gold that backs their digital currency. And I saw an ad for it. It just blew my mind.
So you can buy you can buy cryptocurrency that is
Literally
theoretically
backed by gold.
Yeah, like I think it's a stable coin based on gold. I was so confused.
No, like the value, like they actually buy gold and back the value of the cryptocurrency using gold.
Yeah, exactly. Like your crypto's worth like 0.1 ounces of gold.
Yeah.
You know
So
what?
then it's stable, right? Yeah.
I'd consider investing in that, but I think I'd probably just put gold one step ahead of that. I don't know. That's me personally. I don't know. I'm not I'm an old school like that. If I'm gonna invest in gold, I'll probably just invest in gold rather than going through like 3 or 4 proxies. Just
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm only here for the proxies. I don't know about you. The more proxies, the better. I want to be investing in a digital currency that invests in USD that invests in gold at least.
Well, the more layers of proxy, the more opportunities for leverage. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
if I can't leverage 100 times 100 times 100 times 100, like what am I even doing with my investment?
He's not.
So you guys got more thoughts on
No,
Central?
I think that's my closing
I think
thought
it's
is
worth-
sounds like a very very bad idea and probably should not do it.
I think it's worth pointing out in like the crazy alternative future where there's a revolutionary upset in the world and people want to overturn the existing way things are. A central bank digital currency would be a way that a central bank could actually just cut out the middleman of banks and directly administer accounts and finances for the population.
I think that would be the eventual goal, right? Like,
I don't think that would ever be the goal, like in our reality as it is right now. But if we have a massive depression like the Great Depression, I could see people start agitating for something like that.
Well, in a milder form, I could see like not replacing banks, but if you look at what happened in the US with like the SVB and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
some
people
were
getting
argu-
sick of those banks, right?
No, not necessarily, but people basically arguing for a central bank where your deposits are 100% secure and there is no possible bank run because it's the central bank.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's operating. So, the problem with, SVB, you had people who were depositors who were just literally looking for a place to sit their money, and they didn't think it was in a risky asset because it's just bank deposit, and they had some of them. I think one of the tech companies had like billions of dollars in like basically their operating cash just sitting at the bank, and so your insured amount is 250,000. Well, they had whatever millions or billions of dollars that was uninsured, and so one of the arguments is like we need a true service that is literally just a secure place to store your cash securely with zero risk. Like if you wanted to put your money in a spot that it is accessible to you to use as cash, and you want zero like loss risk, then you could do that with like a central bank that's operating a central bank digital currency, because they'd be the one, it'd be the central bank, aka the government.
Yeah, that's how I
securing it.
understood that the one that like they're proposing would work, because it would basically be like having a pile of cash, except that the pile of cash would be digital. So your pile of cash could be $1 billion without literally being the size of a house.
And because the central bank would have no reason to invest it, and it would be 100% insured. Yeah, I think there's a couple problems with that. Is like, at least from my understanding, is it could easily really hurt the bank, like the banking system, in terms of what does the bank do? It does take your cash and then lend it out.
Yeah, it actually generates like economic growth that way.
Yeah, so that'd be one knock against the offering this such thing, is then you'd have all this money flowing into this safe, 100% safe and secure thing, and then what does the banks do? Like, how do they generate liquidity and cash such that they can lend it back out to people that need it for investment and growing their business, etc. So I think that's one big argument. And then the second argument I could see is then, like, I guess you could still quote unquote have a bank run, and then the central bank would just have to print unlimited essentially to cover that, and then that could create issues, right? So I don't know. I do think it's an interesting concept, but I just don't. Again, I don't know if the second order effects would really be worth.
Yeah, I just think there's so much room for abuse. Like, I think it could be fine. Like, if you had in a theoretically, like, completely unabusable system in that sense, from like a government standpoint, it's like, I could see some value there, but because the room for abuse is so great that like the minor benefits that you could get, I feel just they're not even remotely close to making up for the downside. Like, it just, to me, does not seem like a trade that, it just seems like a trade that's extremely lopsided, right? It seems one particular class of people will greatly benefit from it, and then everybody else won't. They'll get some little minor goodies, and that's the end of it. Actually, one other point is, like, especially Price, you brought this up, like, when we talked offline at one point, and just, you were saying that, like, people are so addicted to their, like, their credit card reward systems. It's like, if you have a central bank digital currency, it's like, are people going to have to start, or this with the central bank, then if they really want to start replacing it across the board, have to start offering all of these rewards and programs and stuff like that, like travel rewards? It seems like, to me, moving towards, especially the more hard version of it, you would just lose an awful amount of just nice fringe benefits on that side, which would be pretty irritating.
Yeah, I'd imagine a more realistic image would be something like your credit card is now technically working on central bank digital currency rather than electronic currency, if that's the distinction to be made.
Yeah, I could see that being...
I can't see people ever moving off credit cards at this point. So, like, your option would be to make those credit cards run on the central bank digital currency, which, I mean, I don't know if that's a pedantic point or if it would actually be meaningful. But if you got rid of the banks and you wanted a central bank to do everything, it would need to offer credit and credit cards, because that's just how our economy functions. Although, as I was saying, to go that far would require a radical rethink of everything. And maybe you would have a Islamic caliphate that just didn't believe in credit.
Or you get the logical conclusion, you'll have Canada Central Bank rewards points store, and you can get an espresso machine for 800,000 Canadian Central Bank digital reward points that you get for your
cats instead of sats.
Your cashback purchases at the grocery store. It's definitely that's
coming together.
It's gonna be the dream. Air
Maple
miles
syrup is in the earliest section.
Pardon me?
Maple syrup is in the earliest tier of redeemable points.
Oh yeah, 20,000 for maple syrup.
Yeah, it's like it's a cheapie. They got to subsidize Quebec.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely not a future I'd be looking forward to. Getting my rewards points from the federal government. No, by the end it'll be like, oh, your beef meal, 800,000 points. You get it once a year.
No, even better. It'll be you'll need 800,000 points to unlock basic Chat GPT in Canada, and then the higher tiers are locked behind millions of points because you can't have the plebes having access to those.
They're too dangerous. Make them too productive.
Well, I don't got anything else to ramble on about for that, but
Yeah, that's
guys,
about it for me.
Same. All right. Thanks for listening. Peace.